You've been sitting here for 31 minutes. He's not coming. He was never going to come. Emma Richards looked up, and the man standing over her table was not Marcus Chen. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his face. She didn't know that in the next 40 minutes he would rearrange every single thing her life had been built on, quietly, calmly, the way a man rearranges furniture in a room he already considers his own. She thought it was a bad date. It was the last ordinary night she would ever have. Subscribe now. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Emma's story travels. The hostess smiled at Emma the way people smile at someone they feel sorry for but will not help. It was a specific kind of smile. Emma had learned to recognize it over the years. The pressed lips, the slight tilt of the head, the eyes that do a single sweep downward before snapping back up to neutral. It said, "You are in the wrong place, and we both know it, and I am too polite to say so." Emma kept her chin up. "I'm meeting someone," she said. "Marcus Chen. He made the reservation." The hostess checked her screen, a pause that lasted 2 seconds longer than it needed to. "Of course. Right this way, Mrs. Richards." She followed the woman through the restaurant, past tables of people, in clothes that cost more than Emma's monthly rent, past low amber lighting that made everyone look effortlessly beautiful, past a bar where a man in a perfectly cut jacket glanced up at her and then glanced away, which was somehow worse than being stared at. Her table was in the back. Not the window, not the center. The back near the service corridor, where the ambient noise of the kitchen bled through the wall in a low, constant hum. Emma sat down, set her purse in her lap, and picked up the menu. The prices were not printed with dollar signs. They were just numbers floating there, as if money were too crass a concept for this particular room. Marcus was 8 minutes late. Fine. Traffic, parking, normal things. She texted Dana, "Just got here waiting," and got back a string of emojis that communicated nothing useful. Dana had described Marcus as the kind of man you don't let get away, which was exactly the kind of thing Dana said about every man she set Emma up with, and which had so far resulted in 3 years of first dates that did not become second dates, and one memorable evening that ended with Emma paying for her own cab home from a restaurant that wasn't even as nice as this one. 14 minutes. The server came by, young man. Careful eyes, the particular expression of someone trying very hard not to notice that the woman at table 9 was alone. "Something to drink while you wait." "Just water, thank you." Of course. She hated the of course. She hated the way it had confirmed what she already knew, that he had taken one look at her and filed her under woman waiting alone handle gently. 19 minutes. She picked up her phone, started typing, "Hey, just checking in," deleted it, typed it again, deleted it again, set the phone face down, breathed. She had been in this exact position before. Not this restaurant, not this dress, but this precise emotional configuration. The waiting, the checking, the deliberate not checking, the telling herself that everything was fine, that people ran late, that she was not being stood up, that she was not the kind of woman who got stood up because she was too much or too little or too something that she could never quite identify. 23 minutes. The door opened. Emma did not look up. She had stopped looking up every time the door opened around the 14-minute mark because hope, she had learned, was a resource that needed to be managed carefully. But something made her look up this time. Not a sound, not a voice. Something else, a change in the pressure of the room, the way a room changes when something significant enters it. The ambient conversation didn't stop, but it pulled back the way a tide pulls back before something larger moves in. She looked up. He came through the door the way very few people enter any room, like the room had been waiting for him, like his arrival was the thing the evening had been building toward. 2 men flanked him, not close, not touching, but positioned in a way that was so deliberate it looked almost choreographed. They weren't in uniforms, they weren't visibly armed, but they moved like men who were always at every moment making decisions about sight, lines, and proximity and threat. And Emma, who had grown up in neighborhoods where she learned early to read, that kind of movement felt the recognition in her body before her brain caught up. These were not security guards. These were something older than that, something without a clean name. The man they flanked was in his early 30s. Dark-haired jaw sharp enough to cast a shadow, wearing a charcoal jacket over black, with the kind of effortless precision that came not from caring about clothes but from inhabiting your body with complete authority. His face was, she searched for the word and landed on certain. certain in the way that a compass is certain, the way a locked door is certain. The maitre d' appeared from the far end of the room. He didn't walk, he materialized the way staff do when someone important arrives, with a speed that confirmed exactly who this man was in the hierarchy of this restaurant and every other room he walked into. She watched him lean forward slightly and speak. The man in charcoal barely nodded, and then he looked across the room. At her table, Emma's first thought was there's been a mistake. Her second thought, arriving a half-second later, with the cold clarity of something true, was there has been no mistake at all. He walked toward her, directly, without hesitation. The two men behind him recalibrated, automatically moving to new positions as their principal changed direction, and Emma watched all of it happen and had the very distinct and very unwelcome sensation of being caught in something that had started before she arrived. He stopped at her table. She looked up at him. He was looking down at her with those eyes. Dark amber, the color of something preserved, something old, and they were completely, perfectly, disturbingly calm. "You've been sitting here for 31 minutes, he said. "He's not coming. He was never going to come." The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. "I'm sorry," Emma said. "Who are you?" "Damian Vulkoff." She waited for more. "He didn't offer any. And how do you know whether my date is coming or not?" "Because the man who told him about tonight also works for me." He pulled out the chair across from her, not asking, not gesturing toward it, and sat down. "And when Marcus decided this evening was inconvenient, I heard about it." Emma stared at him. "He told someone who works for you that he was canceling a blind date." "Yes." "And you decided to come here and tell me in person?" "Yes." She saw. Instead of, she paused, aware of how absurd the next words were going to sound, sending a text or having someone call or doing literally anything that a normal person would do in this situation. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. The ghost of something that might become a smile if circumstances ever warranted one. "I'm not particularly normal," he said. "That," Emma said, "is extremely obvious." She reached for her purse. "Wait." She stopped. Not because he had any authority over her, she told herself that firmly and immediately, but because of the way he said it. Not a command, not a request. Just a single word placed in the air between them, with the quiet certainty of someone who rarely needed to say anything twice. "Marcus Chen has a problem," Damian said. "A financial one. The kind that brings certain kinds of attention down on people who aren't equipped to handle it." A pause. "You would have found out eventually. I'm telling you now." Emma kept her hand on her purse. "What kind of financial problem?" "The kind that doesn't get resolved with a payment plan." She looked at him steadily. "You're telling me my blind date owes money? To dangerous people?" "Yes. To people like you. A beat. Not to me specifically, but to people in my world." Emma felt the floor shift slightly beneath the conversation, not beneath the physical chair, but beneath the logic of what was happening. The sense that she was in a different kind of room than she had thought she was walking into when she'd arrived tonight. "What is your world?" she asked. He looked at her the way people look at something they're deciding how much of to show. "I solve problems," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the honest one." "What kind of problems?" "The kind that don't respond to ordinary solutions." He settled back in his chair with the ease of a man who was completely entirely unbothered by the tension accumulating at the table. "When something has gone wrong in a way that police won't touch or lawyers can't fix, people come to me." Emma put her purse back down. She was angry at herself for putting it down. She put it down anyway. "And you fix it," she said. "I fix it." "How?" His eyes held hers. "However it needs to be fixed." The server appeared visibly startled by the addition of a man and 2 large people standing nearby to what had been a solitary dinner situation, and managed to take their order with only a slight stammer. Damian ordered without looking at the menu. He ordered salmon for her without asking, and Emma opened her mouth to object and then closed it because he had ordered exactly what she had been staring at for 40 minutes. "That's going to stop right now," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "The knowing things, the ordering for me, whatever this is." She gestured at the general situation. "I don't know you. You sat down at my table without asking. You had my date scared off apparently, and you haven't explained why any of that was your business. So," she pressed her palms flat on the table. "Explain." He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone gathering a lie, the quiet of someone deciding how much truth to measure out. Because someone told me about a woman named Emma Richards, he said, who was waiting at this restaurant for a man who wasn't worth her time, and I wanted to see if that was accurate. The breath Emma took was careful and controlled. You had me looked into, she said. I had a question answered. Those are the same thing. They're not. His voice was even. Looking into someone means I wanted information I could use against them. I wanted to know if you were here who I thought you might be. And who did you think I might be? He picked up the menu, her menu, the one she had set down, and placed it in front of her. The gesture was deliberate without being theatrical. Eat something, he said. You've been here for 40 minutes and you've had water. That's not an answer. No, he agreed, it's not. She picked up her fork. She hated that she picked up her fork. The salmon arrived and it was perfect, and she was furious about that too. They ate in silence for 2 minutes. Outside their table, the restaurant moved through its ordinary evening glasses, touched. Someone laughed. A couple near the window leaned toward each other in the candlelight. Normal things, ordinary things. Nothing about this table was ordinary. Why me? Emma asked. He looked up. I'm not anyone. She kept her voice level. I don't have money. I don't have connections. I don't have any reason to be interesting to someone like you. So, she set her fork down. Why did you come here tonight? The real reason. Damian was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, because you waited. She frowned. 31 minutes, and he said, anyone in that room could see he wasn't coming. The server felt sorry for you. The hostess checked on you twice without saying anything. But you sat there, a pause, the weight of it, with your back straight and your hands in your lap, and you didn't perform distress for the room. You didn't do what most people do, which is make it look less bad by acting like you don't care. You just waited, like you had every right to be there. Like your being there didn't depend on someone else showing up. Emma did not move. And I thought, Damian continued, that whoever she's waiting for is going to ruin her. Because people who wait like that, people who carry themselves like that, when they think no one is watching, they are almost always waiting for exactly the wrong person. The candle light on the table held very still. You don't know me, Emma said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. Not yet. The door opened. Later she would think about how differently that evening might have gone if Marcus Chen had chosen any other moment to arrive. If he had come in 10 minutes earlier when she was still armed with righteous anger. If he had come in 10 minutes later when she might have rebuilt her defenses. But he came in at exactly that moment when Damian Vulkoff had said not yet, and Emma Richards was still deciding what to do with that, and she turned, and there he was, Marcus Chen, standing in the entrance of Belmont and Cupertine in a slightly rumpled blazer phone in hand, scanning the room with the slightly guilty expression of a man who had almost not come back and had then talked himself into it, probably composing the apology on the drive over. He found her table. His eyes moved from her to the man sitting across from her. The color left his face, not gradually, not the slow drain of embarrassment or surprise. It left all at once the way blood leaves a face when the body receives information the conscious mind hasn't caught up with yet, primal, involuntary, a full-body recognition of something dangerous. Damian did not stand up. He did not raise his voice. He did not move at all. He simply looked at Marcus Chen across the length of the restaurant with those still amber eyes, and whatever Marcus saw in them, whatever specific calculation lived behind that calm was enough. Marcus took one step back, then another. Then he turned and walked out the door. He was gone in 12 seconds. Emma counted. She didn't know why she counted. She counted anyway. She turned back to the table. What just happened? She said. He understood the situation. What situation? Damian picked up his water glass, set it down, looked at her directly. That you're with me. 3 words. 3 words that should have made her stand up, should have made her say absolutely not. I don't know you. I don't belong to anyone. Should have triggered every reasonable alarm in a reasonable woman's reasonable head. She said none of those things. She sat there, and the silence stretched between them like something being signed. She didn't know in that moment what she had just agreed to. She didn't know that the man sitting across from her had not stumbled into this restaurant by coincidence, that nothing in his life happened by coincidence, that coincidence was a luxury he had never needed and never intended to develop a taste for. She didn't know that the evening she had written off as another small humiliation, in a long series of small humiliations, had just become something else entirely. She didn't know that outside on the sidewalk, Marcus Chen was making a phone call with shaking hands. She didn't know that two of Damian's men were already running his name through systems that had no official name and no official existence. She didn't know any of it. All she knew was that the salmon was getting cold and the man across from her was watching her with those calm amber eyes, waiting the way he had told her she had waited, like he had all the time in the world and nowhere else on earth he would rather be. And Emma Richards, who had walked in here tonight expecting nothing, who had $12.40 in her purse and a best friend who meant well, in a string of evenings that had gone nowhere, made the decision that would change everything. She picked up her fork again. She ate. She stayed. That was the first mistake. The one she would never for the rest of her life be entirely certain was a mistake at all. She stayed through dessert she didn't order and coffee she didn't ask for. And at some point during the second hour of the evening, Emma Richards stopped waiting for a reason to leave and started listening instead. That was the second mistake, but she wouldn't count it until much later. Damian talked the way he did everything else with economy, with precision, without a single wasted word. He didn't tell her stories about himself. He didn't offer his history or his childhood or the kind of personal mythology that men usually deploy on first dates to seem interesting. He asked her questions, small ones at first, where she worked, how long she'd lived in the city, and then larger ones, the kind that required actual answers, the kind people usually waited months to ask. "What do you want?" he said, just like that, over coffee, like it was a simple thing. Emma looked at him. "That's a strange question for a Tuesday night. It's the only question worth asking. Most people ask what I do for a living." "I already know what you do for a living." He set his cup down. "I'm asking what you want." She opened her mouth, closed it. The honest answer was sitting right there at the front of her mind. She wanted to stop feeling like she was always slightly behind, always slightly wrong, always arriving to the party a few minutes after everyone had already formed their opinions about who she was and decided she didn't quite fit. She wanted to stop apologizing for things she hadn't done. She wanted someone to look at her the way this man was looking at her right now, not as a problem to be managed or a disappointment to be explained away, but as something worth crossing a room for. She said none of that. "I want to go home," she said. "It's late." He nodded once, called for the check without flagging anyone down. The server materialized immediately, as if he'd been waiting for a signal that existed only for people who operated at this frequency, and paid without Emma seeing the amount. She reached for her purse anyway, out of reflex, out of the same stubborn pride that had kept her back straight for 31 minutes in a restaurant where she couldn't afford the water. "Don't," he said. "I'm Emma." Just her name. Flat. Final. She put her purse down. Outside, the city was cold and bright and indifferent, the way cities are at 11 o'clock on ordinary Tuesdays. His car was already there, a dark sedan idling, the driver standing beside the rear door, with the stillness of someone who had been waiting exactly as long as needed. Emma stood on the sidewalk and pulled her coat tighter and told herself she was about to say goodnight and get in a cab and call Dana from the back seat and never think about Damian Vulkoff again. "I'll have someone drive you home," he said. "I can get a cab." "Emma, you keep saying my name like it ends conversations." "Because it usually does." She looked at him. He was watching her with that expression again, the one she still couldn't classify, somewhere between patience and amusement, and something else she didn't have a word for yet. "I don't get in cars with men I don't know," she said. "You just had dinner with one." "That was different." "How?" She didn't have a good answer. It was a public place. "My driver's name is Raymond," Damian said. "He has worked for me for 11 years. He has 3 daughters. The youngest just started college." He paused. "He will take you wherever you ask him to, and he will not speak unless spoken to, and you will be home in 20 minutes. Emma looked at Raymond. Raymond looked back at her with the expression of a man who had seen many things and had opinions about none of them. "Fine," she said. She got in the car. Damian did not get in with her. He closed her door, leaned briefly toward the driver's window, said something she couldn't hear, and stepped back onto the sidewalk. He was still standing there when Raymond pulled away from the curb. Emma looked through the rear window and watched him shrink as the distance grew between them, standing perfectly still, hands in his jacket pockets watching the car go. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. A text message. "Good night. Emma Richards." She stared at it. Her thumbs hovered. She typed back, "How do you have this number?" 3 seconds later. "I told you, I tend to know things." She should have blocked it right there. She knew she should have blocked it. She set the phone in her lap and looked out the window at the city going by, and she did not block it. And she told herself that was simply because blocking things felt dramatic, and she was not a dramatic person. She was absolutely a dramatic person. She just hadn't been given sufficient material until tonight. Dana called at 7 the next morning. "Tell me everything," Dana said before Emma had fully opened her eyes. From the beginning, every single word. Emma lay in the dark of her bedroom and stared at the ceiling and thought about where the beginning was. Marcus not showing up. The shift in the room when the door opened. Those amber eyes finding her table from across the restaurant. You waited. The way Marcus had walked back out the door in 12 seconds. "That you're with me." "It was strange," Emma said. "Strange good or strange bad?" "Strange like I don't have a category for it." Dana's voice went tight with excitement. "What happened?" Emma told her. Not everything. She left out the parts. She couldn't explain the parts that felt too large to hand to someone else without context, without a framework. She told her the surface version. Marcus didn't show a man sat down. They had dinner. He knew things he shouldn't have known. Raymond drove her home. Dana was silent for 4 full seconds. For Dana, that was geological. "What did you say his name was?" "Damian Vulkoff." Another silence, different from the first. "Dana, I'm Googling." "Don't." "Oh," Dana said. "What, Emma?" "What?" "You had dinner with..." A pause. "Okay, I'm sending you something. Look at your phone right now." The article Dana sent was 3 years old from a financial publication. Emma didn't subscribe to a profile of a man described as a private acquisition specialist who had built a holding company from nothing in under a decade, whose name appeared on the boards of 7 legitimate companies and in the footnotes of 4 government investigations that had been quietly closed before they reached anything public. There was a photograph. He was younger in it, sharper somehow, before whatever had settled into his face and made it certain. He was standing in front of what appeared to be an office building, looking directly at the camera, with the expression of a man who had consented to exactly one photograph and intended to communicate that clearly. Even in a grainy 3-year-old photograph, he looked like someone who got what he wanted. "Emma," Dana said carefully, "that's not a businessman." "I know." "Did you know last night?" Emma was quiet. "Emma, I had a suspicion." "A suspicion?" Dana's voice had gone to a register that meant she was choosing words carefully and also struggling not to yell. "You had a suspicion and you still had dinner with him. The salmon was really good." "That is not, Emma, that is not the point." Her phone buzzed. The unknown number again. Not a text this time, a call. "Dana, I have to go." "Don't you dare," she answered. "Good morning," Damian said. She sat up in bed. Her heart was doing the thing again, the irresponsible thing. She pressed a fist against her sternum, like that would help. "It's 7 in the morning," she said. "I know." "How do you know I'm awake?" A pause. "I didn't. I hoped." Something about that, the admission of something as ordinary as hope, landed differently than anything else he'd said the night before. She filed it away in the part of her brain she was trying to keep separate from the rest of this. "What do you want?" she said, using his question, his own words. He heard it. She could tell by the brief silence. "Dinner tonight," he said. "No, why not?" "Because I don't know who you are." "You know more than most people." "That's not reassuring, actually." "Emma, don't." She stood up, moved to the window, looked out at the city in its early morning gray. "I looked you up." Silence. 4 government investigations, she said. Closed, without explanation. "Yes." "That's your response?" "Yes." "What would you like me to say?" "I'd like you to explain what 4 government investigations means for someone who solves problems." He was quiet for a moment, not evading, thinking she was starting to learn the difference. "It means I operate in spaces that attract attention," he said. "And it means I'm effective enough at what I do that the attention eventually goes elsewhere. And the people who work for you, the ones who warned Marcus away, what do they do?" Whatever needs doing. That's the same answer as last night, because it's still the only accurate one. Emma pressed her hand against the cold window glass. Outside, a woman walked her dog in the early morning quiet, head down against the wind, ordinary and uncomplicated in a way that Emma felt as a specific kind of longing. You scared a man out of a restaurant with a look, she said. Marcus Chen is not a man worth scaring. That's not the point. The point is you did it without effort, without hesitation. She turned away from the window. What are you, Damian? The name came out before she could catch it. First name, his name in her mouth in the morning light. She heard the slight change in his breathing. Dinner tonight, he said again, and I'll answer that question honestly. You'll answer it now. No, because you'll hang up. She almost laughed. She pressed her lips together to stop it. That's not, you can't. Tonight, 7 o'clock, I'll send the address. The call ended. She stared at her phone. She was furious. She was fully, completely furious and also already thinking about what she was going to wear, and she hated herself for both of those things in roughly equal measure. She went to work. She sat at her desk at the nonprofit where she managed grants for community arts programs, and she answered emails and attended a budget meeting and ate lunch at her desk and did not think about Damian Vulkoff for almost 90 consecutive minutes, which she counted as a victory. At 3:17 in the afternoon, a package arrived at her office. Not to the building, not to the front desk, to her desk, placed there by a courier who told the receptionist only that it was for Emma Richards' personal delivery and was gone before anyone thought to ask for a name. It was a small box. Inside the box was a single item, a silk scarf in deep burgundy, the kind of scarf that cost more than Emma made in a week and felt when she touched it like holding something that existed in a different economic dimension than the one she occupied. There was no card, no note, nothing. Her phone buzzed. The unknown number. A single text for tonight, 7 o'clock. Emma sat at her desk with a silk scarf in her hands and thought about what kind of man sent presents to a woman's workplace before she'd agreed to see him again, and what kind of woman kept the presents and whether there was a meaningful difference between the two. She kept the scarf. She told herself it meant nothing. She wore it that evening. The address he sent was not a restaurant. It was a building, a tower of dark glass in the financial district that she had walked past 100 times without looking up. The lobby was a large man in a black jacket who somehow knew her name before she said it and escorted her to an elevator that required a key to operate and took her without stopping to the 43rd floor. The doors opened directly into a penthouse. Emma stepped out and stopped. The space was enormous and almost aggressively sparse. High ceilings, dark floors, floor-to-ceiling windows on three sides that turned the city into something abstract and beautiful. The kind of view that made you feel simultaneously powerful and very small. There was very little furniture. What was there was expensive, in the way that truly expensive things are expensive, not showy, not loud, just absolutely, completely certain of its own quality. Damian was standing near the windows with a glass of something amber in his hand. He turned when he heard the elevator. He looked at the scarf. Something moved through his expression, brief, controlled, but there. She caught it. You came, he said. I came to ask my question, Emma said, in person, because you wouldn't answer it on the phone. Of course, he gestured toward the seating area. Sit down. I'd rather stand. Then stand. He moved toward her, stopping at a distance that was correct, close enough to speak quietly, far enough that she didn't feel crowded, and she noticed again the way he managed space. Everything deliberate, everything measured, as if he had calculated the exact geometry of every interaction before it happened. You asked what I am, he said. Yes. The honest answer will change things. Things are already changed, Emma said, since approximately 8:30 last night. He studied her for a moment. Then he said, I run an organization, a large one. We operate in areas that require leverage, enforcement, resolution of situations that exist outside legal frameworks. Emma kept her voice steady. You're telling me you're in organized crime. I'm telling you I'm in organization, he said. The crime is a function of what other people call the work, not what the work actually is. That is an extremely fine distinction. Most important distinctions are fine. And the investigations were conducted by people who understood eventually that prosecuting me would open questions they were not prepared to answer publicly. He paused. I don't traffic people. I don't deal in substances. I don't touch children. Whatever picture you're constructing in your head, I'm not constructing a picture, Emma said. I'm looking at one you're giving me. He was quiet, then fair. So what do you do specifically? He crossed to the window and looked out at the city. Her city, the city she had grown up in, the margins of the city that had given her public school and community college and a nonprofit salary and blind dates that didn't show up. And he said, money, influence, protection. I control what moves through this city's real economy, not the one in the newspapers, the one underneath it. The silence in the room was very large. And Marcus, Emma said, his debt is with someone I have influence over, yes. Is that why you were at the restaurant? Because of him, because of whatever connection? No. He turned from the window. I told you why I was at the restaurant. That part was true. Emma stood very still. Then what happens now? You've told me what you are. I know what I know. What happens next? He looked at her directly. No evasion, no calculation, just the truth placed in the room between them. That depends entirely on you. She should have said nothing happens. I leave. I go home and I never see you again. She should have said that. Instead, she said, what does it mean if I stay? Not tonight. I mean, she stopped, regathered. If this becomes whatever it might become, what does that mean for me, honestly? He walked toward her, slowly, stopped 2 feet away, close enough that she could see the fine details of his face, the line of tension at his jaw, the way his eyes changed in proximity, the small tell of a muscle in his throat. It means you're protected, he said. Absolutely. No one touches you. No one comes near you. You want for nothing. And you're mine. The words settled into the room like something heavy and irreversible being set on a table. Not owned, not controlled, but mine in the sense that everything I am extends to you, and everything you do reflects on what I am. And there is no version of being near me that doesn't carry weight. Emma's heart was hammering. She kept her face neutral through sheer force of habit. That sounds like a cage. Some people call it that. What do you call it? He was quiet for a moment, then very quietly, I call it the only thing I've ever wanted to give anyone. The city glittered beyond the windows. 43 floors below, Emma's ordinary life continued without her, her apartment, her desk, her $12.40, her string of first dates that went nowhere. All of it sitting there patient, waiting for her to come back to it. And Emma Richards stood in a penthouse that belonged to a man who ran the underneath of the city, wearing a scarf he had sent to her office, and she did not move toward the elevator. She said, I want the ground rules. Something shifted in his eyes. Ground rules. Yes, if this is whatever this is, I need to know what I can and can't do, where I can go, what I can say. I need to know exactly what I'm walking into. He looked at her for a long moment. Then something happened to his face that she hadn't seen before. Not the ghost of a smile, not the measured patience, but something closer to relief. Like a man who had been holding his breath and had, just for the first time in a very long time, allowed himself to exhale. Sit down, he said. This time she did. And as the city burned gold and white beyond the glass, Damian Vulkoff began to tell Emma Richards the rules of a world she had never known existed, a world she had just agreed in everything but words to enter. She didn't know that 2 floors below them, in a room she would never be shown, 3 of his men had spent the last 6 hours removing the last traces of a problem that bore Marcus Chen's name. She didn't know that by morning, Marcus Chen would be on a plane to another city with new documents and a warning he would spend the rest of his life heeding. She didn't know that Damian Vulkoff had made one decision about Emma Richards before he ever walked through the restaurant door, and that he had not once in the entirety of his adult life made a decision he later reversed. What she knew was the warmth of the scarf at her neck, the weight of his eyes, the particular quality of a silence that felt against all reason like the beginning of something. Instead of the end, she stayed. She told herself it was for the ground rules. She knew it wasn't for the ground rules. And somewhere in the city below the real story, the one with no clean ending, no safe exits, and no version of itself that left Emma Richards unchanged, was just beginning to move. The ground rules took 2 hours. Damian laid them out the way he did everything, without drama, without softening, with the calm precision of a man reading the terms of a contract He had already decided both parties would sign. Emma sat across from him and listened and asked questions and pushed back on 3 separate points and watched him concede on 2 of them, which told her more about him than anything else had. He conceded. She hadn't expected that. Rule 1, she kept her job. He didn't argue this. He looked at her for a moment when she said it firmly, hands flat on her knees. I keep my job, that's not negotiable, and then nodded once like she had confirmed something he already knew about her. Rule 2, Dana. Her friendship with Dana was hers. Damian's world did not get to reach into that. He was quiet for slightly longer on this one. I won't forbid it, he said. I'm not asking for permission. I know. A pause. But Dana will notice things. People around you always notice things. And noticing things about me in the wrong company can become dangerous, Emma said. Complicated. Those are the same word in your world, aren't they? He looked at her. Yes. Then Dana stays in my life, and you make sure nothing complicated comes near her. Emma kept her voice level. That's the deal. Non-negotiable. He was quiet for a long moment, then agreed. Rule 3 was the one he didn't concede on. Emma had said she needed to know where she stood, not his property, not someone who disappeared when it suited him, not an arrangement that existed only as long as she was convenient. She struggled to find the word for it, and then found it and said it plainly because she was too tired to dress it up. She wanted acknowledgement. Something real. Something that meant she was a person in this equation, not a possession. Damian listened to all of that. He waited until she was finished. Then he said, You will always be told the truth. Whatever I can tell you, I will. Whatever I can't, I'll tell you that I can't, and I won't pretend otherwise. That's not the same as what I asked for. No, he said. It's better. Because what you're asking for is a feeling. What I'm offering is a fact. He paused. In my world, feelings get managed. Facts are the only thing that stays real. Emma thought about that for a long time. Then she said, all right. She went home that night. Alone. He walked her to the elevator himself. Raymond was waiting downstairs. And at the door, he did something she hadn't expected. He stopped and he said, thank you. She turned. For what? For the ground rules. A pause. Nobody has ever negotiated with me before. She looked at him in the elevator doorway. This man who controlled what moved through the underneath of the city, who made men flee restaurants with a look, who had 4 closed government investigations in his history, and a penthouse that cost more than she would earn in a lifetime. And she said, that's the saddest thing you've told me all night. The elevator doors closed between them. She rode down 43 floors, thinking about the look on his face when she'd said it. Not hurt, she didn't think Damian was easily hurt. But something. A small displacement, like a door that had been shut for a very long time and had just been opened an inch. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of Emma's life. Not because anything dramatic happened, not at first. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was extraordinary in its ordinariness. Damian texted her in the mornings, not effusively, not with the performative warmth of someone trying to impress. Short messages. How did the grant review go? There's a decent place on Mercer if you haven't eaten lunch. It's going to rain at 4. Do you have a jacket? She did not have a jacket. She found one waiting at her office that afternoon. No courier this time, just a garment bag draped over her chair. When she came back from a 2 o'clock meeting, dark gray wool, exactly her size, no. Note, she put it on. It fit perfectly. She stood in the office bathroom, looking at herself in the mirror, wearing a coat that cost more than her rent, and felt something shift in her chest. Not gratitude exactly, not discomfort exactly. Something in between that didn't have a clean name. She texted him, the coat is too much. He replied, it's a coat. She texted, it's a statement. He replied, yes, wear it. She wore it. Dana noticed it immediately, the way Dana noticed everything that was one standard deviation outside Emma's normal. They were having coffee on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks into whatever this thing with Damian was, and Dana reached across the table and touched the lapel of the coat and said, that's new? It was a gift. From him. It wasn't a question. Emma nodded. Dana wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. She had been handling this with more restraint than Emma expected Dana, who had opinions about everything and shared them at volume. She had done her research same as Emma and had arrived at her own conclusions and had expressed them once clearly, without yelling, and had then done something very unusual for Dana, which was to stop. Is he good to you? Dana asked. Emma thought about the coat, about the rain jacket text, about the way he had conceded 2 of 3 rules and said thank you at an elevator door like it was a confession. He's careful, she said. That's not the same as good. No, Emma agreed, but it might be what he knows how to do. Dana was quiet then. Be careful, Em, not careful like he's careful. Careful like you know which door's the exit. Emma nodded. She filed that away. She didn't tell Dana that she had already spent a significant portion of the last 2 weeks trying to locate the exit and had found to her own alarm that she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to use it. The first time she saw what he actually was, not the words for it, not the careful explanation in the penthouse, but the living reality of it, was on a Wednesday evening in the 4th week. He had taken her to dinner, a smaller place this time, quieter, tucked away on a side street where the staff knew him and the corner table was apparently always his, regardless of reservations. They had been talking about her work, a grant she was fighting to secure for a community theater program, the bureaucratic obstruction she kept running into the funding committee that kept moving goalposts, and he had been listening with that focused, absolute attention he gave her when she talked, the kind of attention that felt almost startling after years of men who listened with one eye on their phones. And then the door opened and a man came in, thick-necked, expensive watch, the particular brand of confidence that came from having been feared for long enough to stop distinguishing it from respect. He stopped when he saw their table. His face did something complicated. Damian did not turn around. He knew. Emma had no idea how he knew she hadn't reacted, hadn't done anything to signal it, but he simply went still in the way that water goes still before a storm and said quietly to Emma, "Look at me." She looked at him. "Stay with this conversation," he said. "Don't watch what happens next." "What's going to happen next?" "A conversation I need to have." His eyes stayed on hers. 5 minutes, you're fine." The man approached the table. He didn't sit. He leaned down and said something in a low voice. Emma caught 3 words: payment, deadline problem, and felt the air around the table change in a way she now recognized as Damian shifting from one mode into another. What he said back was quiet enough that Emma didn't hear it, but she saw the man's face. She saw the quick, involuntary swallow. She saw the precise moment when confidence converted itself into something smaller and more careful. The man straightened up. He glanced at Emma one quick assessing look, and then back at Damian, and then he left. Walked back out the door he'd come through. Gone. Damian picked up his fork. "You were telling me about the funding committee," he said. Emma stared at him. "What was that, a conversation?" "That man was scared of you." "Yes." "In 30 seconds. He's been scared of me for longer than that. It just manifests most clearly in proximity." Emma set her fork down. "What did he owe you?" Damian looked at her, a decision moving through his eyes. "Not money," he said, "a promise he failed to keep. It's been addressed." "How, Emma?" "You said you'd tell me the truth." "I said I'd tell you what I can." A pause. "This is a situation you don't need the details of. What I can tell you is that the man who just left made a commitment to someone under my protection and broke it, and the consequence of that is now structured in a way that ensures it won't happen again." She thought about that. "Are you going to hurt him?" "No." "Is someone else going to?" "No." He reached across the table, not grabbing her hand, not a dramatic gesture, just his fingertips resting near hers. "Hurt is rarely necessary. Hurt is for people who don't have better options." "I have better options." Emma looked at his hand near hers. She looked at him. "You terrify me sometimes," she said. "I want you to know that." "I know. And I'm still here." "I know that too." She picked her fork back up. They finished dinner, and Emma Richards, who had grown up with enough common sense to know better, felt something she hadn't felt in so long, she'd almost forgotten the texture of it. She felt safe. At the exact moment she felt safest, everything tilted. It happened the following Saturday. She was at her apartment, her own apartment, which she had been careful to maintain the ground rules, when her door buzzer sounded. Not a text from Damian, not Raymond with a package. The buzzer. She pressed the intercom. "Emma!" The voice was older, female, tight with urgency and something that had been contained so long it had changed shape. "It's your Aunt Patricia. I need to come up, right now." Patricia Richards was 62 years old and had raised Emma from 14. After Emma's mother, Patricia's sister, had died in the kind of accident that happens to people who don't have enough money for preventative anything. Patricia was the most practically minded person Emma had ever known. She did not make dramatic entrances. She did not show up unannounced. She did not have a voice like that. Emma buzzed her up. Patricia came through the door and took one look at Emma in the gray wool coat she still had draped over the back of a chair. It was the middle of Saturday morning. Emma had just been having coffee, and her face did something terrible. "Where did that come from?" she said. "It was a gift." "From who?" Not a question. Patricia already knew the shape of the answer. Emma could see it in her posture, in the way she hadn't fully stepped through the doorway, like she needed to remain within reaching distance of the exit. "Sit down, Aunt Patricia." "From who, Emma?" "A man I've been seeing." She kept her voice even. "Come in and sit down and tell me what's happening." Patricia came in. She did not sit. She stood in the middle of Emma's living room with her purse held in front of her like a shield and said, "I got a call yesterday from a woman named Carla Reyes. Do you know that name?" Emma shook her head. "She lost her son 18 months ago." Patricia's voice had gone very flat, very controlled, the way it went when she was holding something in that needed to stay held. Her son owed money to an organization. When he couldn't pay when the deadline passed, and he still couldn't pay, she stopped, took a breath. They didn't hurt him, nothing that could be traced. But he lost his job, then his apartment, then his car. Then she says within 4 months there was nothing left. He left the city. She hasn't heard from him since. Emma stayed very still. "The organization," Patricia said. "The man who runs it. His name is Damian Vulkoff." The name landed in Emma's living room like a dropped glass, not an explosion, but a shattering, the kind that left small pieces you'd find for weeks. "How does Carla Reyes know my name?" Emma said. Patricia looked at her with an expression Emma had seen exactly once before at 14, at a hospital, being told something that would permanently rearrange the landscape of her life. "Because his men have been asking about you," Patricia said. "In your neighborhood, your building, your workplace. People noticed people talk to people who talk to Carla, and Carla talks to anyone who might be adjacent to him." A pause. "She wanted to warn you, before it was too late." Emma's coffee was still on the kitchen counter, still warm. The ordinary Saturday morning was still arranged around her books, her plants, her small and functional life. All of it exactly as she'd left it. "Emma," Patricia's voice broke on the name just slightly. "Tell me you haven't—" "Tell me about the son," Emma said. "His name. What he owed. Why. Does that matter?" "Yes, it matters to me. Tell me," Patricia told her. The son was 28. He had borrowed money not from Damian directly, but from someone inside his organization to cover a business debt that had gone bad. The terms were not the kind that banks published in promotional materials. When the son couldn't meet them, no violence occurred. What occurred was something more precise: the methodical removal of every support structure a person needed to remain functional in a city. Quietly, efficiently, without leaving anything that could be pointed at in a courtroom. Emma listened to all of it. Then she said, "Did the son keep his agreement?" Patricia blinked. "What?" "The original agreement, whatever the terms were. Did he keep them before he defaulted?" Carla didn't say. "Because the story you're telling me has a beginning before the part you've started with," Emma said, "and I need to know what the beginning is." Patricia stared at her niece. "That's what you're focused on right now? Whether the boy followed the rules?" "I'm focused on all of it," Emma said. "The whole picture, not just the part that was sent to scare me." "Sent to scare you?" Patricia's voice rose. "Emma, this is not someone running a scare campaign. This is—" "I know what he is," Emma said quietly. Silence. "I know exactly what he is," Emma continued. "He told me himself. The first night, he didn't dress it up or use careful words. He told me the truth." Patricia sat down, and not by choice her legs made the decision. She sat down on Emma's couch and looked at her niece and said, "How long a month?" "A month." Patricia pressed a hand to her mouth. "Then Emma, that woman's son is gone. Whatever he did or didn't do, he's gone. She doesn't know where he is. She calls his phone and it rings twice and goes to a number that's been disconnected. She sits in her apartment and she doesn't know if her child is—" Patricia's voice fractured. "Is that what you want?" To be the woman sitting somewhere not knowing. Emma stood very still. Because that's who you become, Patricia said. Not his, not protected, not whatever word he used. You become someone who waits and doesn't know. And you will wait for a very long time. Emma walked to the window. She stood there with her back to her aunt and looked out at the Saturday morning city people moving below, carrying groceries, walking dogs, living their legible and ordinary lives. She thought about Damian, the ground rules. Thank you. Nobody has ever negotiated with me before. The coat, the rain text, the man in the restaurant, and the quiet words and the 30 seconds it took to restructure someone's relationship with their own fear. She thought about what he had said about protection, about truth, about not owning but claiming. She thought about what Patricia had just said about a mother who didn't know where her son was. She turned around. I need to make a phone call, she said. Emma, alone, Aunt Patricia, please. Patricia looked at her for a long moment. Then she stood up, collected her purse, and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. Whatever you decide, she said without turning around. I need you to decide it for yourself, not for him, not because you're scared, not because the coat is beautiful and he's the first man who ever made you feel seen. A pause that cost her something. For yourself, because you actually know that it's right. The door closed quietly behind her. Emma stood in the middle of her living room and picked up her phone. She did not call Damian, not yet. She opened the browser and found the article Dana had sent her 4 weeks ago. She read it again. All of it this time. Not the photograph, not the headline, the footnotes, the closed investigations, the names associated, the dates. And in the last paragraph, almost an afterthought, a single sentence that the journalist had buried. Sources close to 2 of the 4 investigations confirmed that charges were not pursued in part due to witness accounts, suggesting Vulkoff's organization had intervened in situations where official channels had failed, including 3 cases involving violence against women that law enforcement had declined to prosecute. Emma read that sentence 3 times. Then she called him. He answered on the second ring. Emma, I need to see you, she said. Today, now. A pause. What happened? I'll tell you when I see you. Send Raymond. Another pause longer, the kind where someone is calculating. Are you all right? I don't know yet, she said honestly. Send Raymond. She hung up. She picked the coat up from the back of the chair. She put it on. She stood in her apartment in the coat that was too much and thought about doors' exits as Dana had said. She had found one. It was right there. Patricia had effectively held it open. She thought about the sentence buried in a footnote. 3 cases. Violence. Official channels failed. She thought about a man who said hurt is rarely necessary. I have better options. She thought about Carla Reyes' son gone into silence. She thought about the 2 things being true at the same time, which was the most dangerous thought she'd had yet, because the moment you accepted that 2 opposing things could both be true about a person, you had lost the clean story. You had lost the easy answer. You had nothing left but the real one. Raymond arrived in 14 minutes. Emma locked her apartment door behind her and walked down to the car and got in. And as they pulled into Saturday morning traffic, she felt not safe, not frightened, not clear. She felt awake, more awake than she'd been in years. Awake in the uncomfortable, irreversible way of someone who has just seen something they cannot unsee and has decided eyes open to walk toward it anyway. She didn't know what she was going to say to him. She didn't know what he was going to say back. She only knew that she was going, and that she was going of her own choosing, and that Aunt Patricia had asked her to decide for herself, and she had. Whatever that cost her, she would pay it. Raymond didn't speak the entire drive. Emma didn't ask him to. She sat in the back seat with her hands in her lap and the coat pulled around her and watched the city slide past the windows and thought about the sentence she had read 3 times in that last paragraph. 3 cases. Violence official channels failed, and what it meant to hold that sentence in the same hand as the story of Carla Reyes' son. She was still holding both when the car stopped. Not the tower, not the penthouse, a different building, lower, older, a brownstone on a quiet street. She didn't recognize the kind of building that didn't announce itself. Raymond opened her door. He's inside, he said, the most words he'd said to her in 6 weeks of driving at her places. She went in. Damian was standing in the middle of a room that looked like a place where actual work happened. Not the sparse architectural statement of the penthouse, but a room with paper on surfaces and two laptops open and a whiteboard covered in names and numbers she didn't let herself read. He was on the phone when she came in. He ended the call the moment he saw her face. No goodbye to whoever was on the other end. Just ended it. "Tell me," he said. She told him all of it. Patricia Carla Reyes, the son, the slow dismantling of a life, the methodical removal of every support structure until a person simply ceased to be findable. She told it without editorializing, without her voice breaking the way she'd learned to deliver hard information at grant meetings when the numbers weren't good, just the facts laid out clearly so there was no room for misunderstanding. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. The son's name, Damian said, was Derek Reyes, and he borrowed $40,000 from a man named Ortega, who operates under my umbrella to cover a debt he had incurred running a scheme that defrauded 11 people out of their savings. Retired people. People who couldn't afford to lose what they lost. He paused. When he defaulted on Ortega, the matter came to me, and yes, I structured the consequence personally. Emma looked at him. "You ruined him." "I removed him from the city he'd been operating in and made sure he couldn't operate the same way anywhere else." A beat. "He's in Phoenix. He has a job. He calls his mother on Sundays from a number he doesn't give out because he's ashamed. She doesn't know that because she's chosen not to look for information that requires acknowledging what her son actually did." The breath Emma took was very controlled. "You know where he is." "I know where everyone is," Damian said. Not proudly, just factually. "Emma, the woman who sent your aunt to you today, she's not wrong that her son suffered consequences. She is wrong about what he is. Those are two different things." "He's still her son." "Yes, he is." His voice didn't harden on that. "And the 11 people he defrauded are still the people who lost their savings." "That's also true." Emma pressed her hands together. "The article," she said, "the one from 3 years ago, there was a sentence at the end about 3 cases. Women, violence that official channels didn't prosecute." Something moved through his expression. Not surprise, something older than surprise. "You read carefully." "I read everything carefully." "Who were they?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed to the whiteboard and turned it around so she couldn't see it, not hiding it, she realized, but giving her his full attention without the distraction of what was on the board. 3 women, he said, different situations. One was a case involving a man with enough money that the investigating officers found reasons to misplace evidence. One was a domestic situation where the responding officers knew the family and made decisions accordingly. The third, he stopped. Something tightened in his jaw. The third was a 17-year-old girl whose case was declined because the man she accused sat on the city council. Emma stood very still. "I handled those situations," Damian said, "not through legal channels, because legal channels had already declined, and the men involved, all 3 of them, experienced consequences that were proportionate and permanent and will not be reversed by appeals or technicalities." "Did you hurt them?" He met her eyes. "I ensured they would never be in a position to do what they had done again. The specific methods are things I'm not going to describe to you over a conversation we're both going to have to continue living after." "That's a yes." "That's an answer," he said, "which is what I promised you." Emma walked to the window, not to look out, just to move, just to put some space between herself and the weight of what she was trying to process. She stood with her back to him for a moment and thought about the 2 things being true at the same time: Derek Reyes and the 11 retired people he'd defrauded. Carla Reyes and her Sunday phone calls she didn't know about. 3 women and the men who would never touch anyone again. She turned around. "I'm not going to tell you it's simple," she said, "because it's not simple. None of this is simple, and I'm not going to pretend it is." "I know. But I'm also not going to let someone else's version of your story be the only version I hear." She looked at him directly. "That's not something I do. I need the primary source." He studied her. "Most people don't want the primary source. They want a version they can live with." "I need one I can live with too," Emma said, "but mine has to be accurate. So," she crossed her arms, "tell me about Ortega." He told her. Not everything she understood by now, that not everything was a thing that existed in this conversation, but enough. Ortega was one of 7 men who operated businesses under the broader architecture of what Damian controlled. Damian was not. She came to understand the man who ran the operations on the ground. He was the man who structured the systems those operations moved through. The distinction was fine. She understood now why he'd said that about fine distinctions. And if someone under you crosses a line, she said, a real line, not a payment default, a real line, then I handle it. How? Depending on the line, he said, very badly for them. She believed him. She didn't know if that should have made her feel better. It did slightly, which she also didn't know what to do with. There's something else, Damian said. Her stomach tightened. Tell me. The person who connected Carla Reyes to your aunt, he said, is not a grieving mother working through community networks. He paused. She was pointed. Someone gave her Patricia's name. Someone who knows your family well enough to know that Patricia is the person you listen to. The room felt smaller suddenly. Someone sent her. Yes. Who? He crossed to one of the open laptops. He turned it toward her. On the screen was a photograph, a man mid-50s, the kind of forgettable face that was probably intentional, and below it a name she didn't recognize. He runs a competing interest in the eastern part of the city, Damian said. For the last 4 months, he has been looking for leverage, something he could use to create instability in my operations. A vulnerability. He paused. You are the first personal vulnerability I have had in 11 years. The word hit her like a hand on the chest. Vulnerability. She was his vulnerability. She was the thing someone had identified and targeted and weaponized before she had even fully understood what she was to him. They went after my aunt, Emma said. They used your aunt. There's a difference. Patricia isn't in danger. She was a delivery mechanism. They needed someone you'd open the door for. A pause. I should have told you sooner that this was a risk. That is my failure, and I'm not making excuses for it. Emma sat down. The chair she chose was hard-backed and functional. The kind of chair that existed for work, not comfort, and that was appropriate because what was happening right now was work, the difficult, unglamorous work of understanding what she had walked into. You're telling me, she said carefully, that being with you makes me a target. Yes, from the beginning. From the moment I sat down at your table, he said. I knew that. I chose it anyway. And I should have given you the full information to make the same choice. Why didn't you? The silence that followed was the longest he'd given her yet. She watched him move through whatever was happening behind his eyes. Not evasion, not calculation, but something more uncomfortable. Something that looked on Damian Vulkoff's face almost unfamiliar. Because I was afraid, he said, that if I told you everything at once, you would make the reasonable decision. The reasonable decision being to leave. He said it flatly, without dressing it up. And I wanted you to stay. So I measured out the truth in amounts I thought you could absorb without running. And that was not what I promised you. Emma looked at the man sitting across the functional table in the working room. The man who made cities move underneath their own surfaces, who ended phone calls without saying goodbye, who had 4 closed government investigations and 11 years without a personal vulnerability, and had just admitted that he'd been afraid. You managed me, she said. Yes. You told yourself you were protecting me. Yes. A pause. And that was also true, but it was also management. And you deserve better than that. Emma was quiet for a long time. I need 24 hours, she said. He nodded immediately, no argument, no negotiation. Raymond, wherever you want to go. He stood up. Emma? She looked at him. Whatever you decide, I will respect it. She almost said something. She stopped herself. Some things needed the full 24 hours. She went to Dana's. She showed up at Dana's apartment at 2 p.m. without texting ahead, and Dana opened the door, took one look at her face and stepped back to let her in without saying a word, which was the most significant thing Dana had ever done for her. They sat on Dana's couch with tea that went cold, and Emma told her everything. Not the managed version she'd given before, the actual version. Derek Reyes and his 11 victims, the 3 women and the council member, the man with the photograph and the leverage campaign, the vulnerability, the admission at the table that had cost Damian something she could see him paying. Dana listened to all of it. When Emma finished, she was quiet for a moment. He admitted he managed you, Dana said. Yes. And he apologized. He didn't use that word. Did he mean it? Emma thought about his face when he'd said that was not what I promised you. The specific quality of it, not performance, not strategy, the look of a man genuinely uncomfortable with his own behavior. Yes, she said. I think he meant it. Okay, Dana set down her cold tea. Here's my question, not about him, about you. When you're with him, when it's just the two of you in the coats, in the rain texts, and the ground rules, who are you? Emma looked at her. What do you mean? I mean, are you less? Are you smaller? Are you the woman in the restaurant waiting for someone to decide whether to show up? Dana's voice was careful and serious in a way it rarely was. Or are you more? Emma thought about negotiating ground rules, about saying that's not an answer until she got one, about reading footnotes twice, about saying that's the saddest thing you've told me all night to a man who probably hadn't heard anything like that in 11 years, about getting in the car this morning, not because she was summoned, but because she chose to go. More, she said quietly. Then I don't know how to tell you to walk away from that, Dana said, even though every reasonable part of me wants to. Emma went home, her own apartment as per the ground rules. She sat with the 24 hours. She thought about her mother who had died because of a world that had decided she wasn't worth its full attention. She thought about Patricia, who had spent 48 years being the most practical person in any room and had still been used as a delivery mechanism by a man with a photograph and a strategy. She thought about 11 retired people who had lost their savings to a charming man with a scheme. She thought about 3 women whose cases had been declined. She thought about what it meant that the world already had darkness in it, permanent structural woven in, and that the only question was what a person did in proximity to it. At 11 o'clock that night, her phone buzzed. Not Damian. Patricia, she answered. I'm not calling to tell you what to do, Patricia said before Emma could speak. I already did that, and it wasn't my place. A pause. I'm calling because I looked into what you said about Derek Reyes. Another pause longer with something heavy moving through it. I called Carla. I asked her directly, what did Derek do? Why did he borrow the money? Emma waited. She told me, Patricia said. She told me the truth, finally. Her voice was tight with the effort of rearranging something she had already organized. He's not a good man, Emma, her son. She loves him, of course she loves him, but he's not a good man. And the people he hurt. She stopped. She didn't tell me about them before. I don't know if she was protecting him or protecting herself. Probably both, Emma said. Probably tonight. A long pause. I'm not saying what that man is right. I'm not capable of saying that. Patricia's voice went very quiet. But I'm also a woman who has spent her whole life watching the right systems fail the wrong people. And I don't know what to do with the fact that someone, even someone like him, sometimes fills that space. Neither do I, Emma said. Are you going back to him? Emma looked at the coat on the back of her chair. She looked at her apartment, her small, functional, carefully maintained apartment with its books and its plants and its $12.40 that had become something more like $200 since Damian had started sending her ridiculous gift cards she used while being furious about them. She looked at her own hands. Yes, she said. Patricia breathed in, breathed out. Then I need you to promise me something. Anything. You keep your job. You keep Dana. You keep me. Patricia's voice broke slightly on the last word and reset itself. You keep the doors, all of them. Whatever you walk into, you remember which one's open from the inside. I promise, Emma said. She called Damian at 7 the next morning. He answered on the first ring. She knew he had been awake. I have conditions, she said. Tell me. The man with the photograph, the one who used my aunt. I need to know when that situation is resolved, not how, just when. I need to know I'm not being managed. Done. And Patricia, whatever protection extends to me, it extends to her. A pause. Also done. And I need you to understand something. She sat up straight in her bed in her apartment in her own ordinary life. The next time there is something I should know, something that affects me, something that changes what I'm walking into, you tell me first. Before it finds me through someone else. Before I'm the last person in the room to have the information. She paused. I don't need to know everything. I know I won't know everything, but I need to not be managed. That's not something I can recover from twice. The silence on his end lasted long enough that she wondered if she'd asked for too much. Yes, he said. You have my word. Your word in your world, Emma said. What does that actually mean? It means, Damian said that I have not broken it once in 32 years, to anyone. She thought about that. She thought about a man who conceded 2 out of 3 ground rules and said thank you at an elevator door and admitted to being afraid and called it plainly his failure. She thought about 11 years without a vulnerability and what it had cost him to become someone's vulnerability on purpose. All right, she said. Send Raymond. She was dressed and ready when the car arrived. She went downstairs with the coat on and her back straight and got into the back seat, and Raymond said, without being spoken to first, "Good morning, Ms. Richards." And she understood that as its own kind of signal that whatever had been uncertain was now in the understated language of men like Raymond settled. When she walked into the brownstone, Damian was standing where she'd left him in the working room, with the same 2 laptops open and the whiteboard turned to face the wall. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he was not entirely certain he would see again. She stopped in front of him, close enough to speak quietly. "One more thing," she said. "Tell me. The man with the photograph. Don't hurt him." She watched his expression. "Find another way. Whatever way makes him stop, find one that isn't that." She paused. "I need to know that I can ask for that. That my being here doesn't mean I lose the right to ask." Damian looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his face complex, layered the kind of rearrangement that happened when a person encountered something they had not adequately anticipated. "You can always ask," he said. "That's not something you lose." And this time, he nodded. "I'll find another way." She believed him. She had learned in 6 weeks and 4 conversations that had changed the shape of her world to read the difference between what he said to manage her and what he said because it was true. This was the second kind. She had learned that distinction the hard way, but she had learned it, and that Emma Richards understood standing in a brownstone on a quiet street while the city went about its loud and ordinary business outside was the thing that mattered most. Not that she had walked into a dangerous world without knowing what it was, but that she had found her footing inside it without losing herself in the process. She had kept her job. She had kept Dana. She had kept Patricia. She had kept the doors, all of them, and she knew exactly which ones opened from the inside. And standing in front of the most dangerous man she had ever met, Emma Richards felt for the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, like a woman who had chosen her life instead of falling into it. That was not the end of the story. It was, in many ways, the beginning of the hardest parts. There would be nights she questioned everything. There would be moments the world he lived in pressed against the edges of the life she was determined to keep. There would be a name on a whiteboard she wasn't supposed to see, and a phone call she wasn't supposed to hear, and a morning she would sit in her apartment with her coat on and her keys in her hand and genuinely not know which way she would go. But that morning in the working room with the laptops open and the whiteboard turned to the wall, Emma looked at Damian Vulkoff and he looked back at her. And for the first time since the night she had walked into Belmont, accompanied in her best ironed dress, expecting nothing, the two of them were standing on the same side of the same truth. She had walked in to meet a stranger. She had walked out belonging to a world she had never known existed. And somewhere between the blind date that never happened and the choice she had just made with her eyes fully open, Emma Richards had stopped being a woman waiting for her life to begin and had become, without quite noticing the moment it happened, a woman who had decided to live it, all of it, on her own terms. That was not a small thing. For Emma Richards, it was everything. The situation with the man in the photograph was resolved in 11 days. Emma knew because Damian told her. Not how he had kept that part of his word too, but when and with enough specificity that she understood it was done and done completely. He called her on a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week this had all started, and said, "It's handled. You won't hear that name again." And she said, "Thank you for telling me first." And he said, "I told you I would." And that was the whole conversation. She thought about how much weight could be carried in 6 words. "I told you I would." In another mouth on another man, it would have been ordinary. On Damian, it landed like a document signed in front of witnesses. She went back to work. She went back to Dana. She went back to her apartment and her plants and the grant committee that kept moving goalposts, and she carried all of it alongside the other thing. The thing that didn't have a clean name yet, the shape of whatever she and Damian were building in the space between his world and hers. It was not easy. She hadn't expected easy. Easy was what she'd been promised on blind dates that didn't show up. What she had instead was real. The second month was harder than the first, in the ways that second months always are. The novelty wore off, and what remained underneath it was either substance or it wasn't. The mornings when his texts didn't come because something was happening in the architecture of his life that she wasn't permitted to see. The evenings she spent at the penthouse and watched him take calls in the other room with the door pulled not quite shut, and heard the tone of his voice change in ways she was learning to read the way you learn to read weather. The specific quality of his silences when something had gone wrong and he was managing it, and the way he came back into the room afterward and looked at her not performing normalcy, just genuinely using her presence as a way to re-enter the world that had ground rules and salmon dinners and women who pushed back. She was his decompression. She understood that. She didn't resent it. She resented the one night she could feel it happening and called him on it directly. "You're using me to come down from something," she said. They were in the penthouse late. She had been there since 8, and it was now past midnight, and he had been on and off calls for 3 hours and had just sat down beside her with the particular weight of a man setting down something heavy he'd been carrying. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Tell me what it is." "I can't. Can't or won't. Tonight can't." His voice was tired in a way she rarely heard it. "Tomorrow I can tell you more. Tonight I just need—" He stopped. He was not a man comfortable asking for things. She could see the machinery of it, the unfamiliarity of the request forming in his mouth. "Okay," she said. She didn't push. She stayed. In the morning he told her more. Not everything, but more. And that she had decided was the working definition of what they were not, everything but more. Incrementally more. In a direction that was going somewhere real. That was the 3rd month. By the 4th month, Emma had started to notice things she hadn't noticed at first, details of the ecosystem surrounding Damian that became visible only once you were inside it long enough for people to stop performing around you. The men who worked for him, not the Raymonds, but the ones further in, the ones whose names she learned slowly and whose functions she understood, only approximately, treated her with a specific kind of deference that had shifted over time. In the beginning, it was wariness, the careful regard of people assessing a new variable. By month 4, it was something else. Respect, maybe, or the recognition that she was not temporary. She noticed this most with a man named Garrett, who appeared to function as something between Damian's second-in-command and his institutional memory. Garrett was 51, gray at the temples, with the eyes of a man who had seen the full spectrum of human behavior and had organized his opinions accordingly. He had never been unfriendly to Emma. He had also never been warm. In month 4, he was warm. "You stayed," he said to her one evening when they happened to be in the same room waiting for Damian, who was running late from something. Not accusatory, just an observation stated with the simplicity of a man who meant exactly the words he used. "I stayed," Emma agreed. Garrett nodded slowly. "There was a woman before you 2 years ago. She lasted 3 weeks. He paused. She wasn't wrong to leave, but she left scared, which meant she left without closure, which meant she left with information that needed managing. He looked at her steadily. "You won't leave scared." Emma held his gaze. "No," she said, "I won't." "I know." A pause. "That's why you're still here." He walked out before Damian arrived, and Emma stood in the room alone, thinking about what it meant to be assessed by men like Garrett, and found not dangerous, not a liability, but something more like sound, structurally sound. The kind of person who, if things ever went badly, would handle the collapse without bringing down anything that didn't need to fall. She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a job description. She decided it was both. The twist she hadn't seen coming arrived on a Friday. It came not from Damian's world, not from another man with a photograph, not from another Carla Reyes, not from the architecture of risk she had cataloged and accounted for. It came from her own. The grant committee, the one that had been moving goalposts for 3 months on the community theater funding, had a new chair. Emma found out on a Friday morning when she arrived at a scheduled meeting and found a different person at the head of the table. Late 50s, expensive suit, the kind of settled authority that came from being in rooms like this one for 30 years. His name was Gerald Marsh, and the way he looked at Emma when she introduced herself, the slight pause, the recalibration, the careful neutrality that dropped over his face like a screen, told her that he recognized her name before she said it. She got through the meeting. She presented the grant application with the same clear, organized precision she had spent 3 years perfecting. She answered questions. She was professional and prepared and completely, entirely aware that something was wrong in a way she couldn't yet identify. She called Damian from the parking lot. He answered in 2 rings. Gerald Marsh, she said, new chair of the funding committee for my grant. Do you know him? A pause, longer than she liked. Damian. He's on the periphery of something, Damian said. Not central, but adjacent. Adjacent to you? Adjacent to a situation that was resolved 6 months ago. He shouldn't be, he should have no reason to. Another pause, shorter, sharper. Where are you right now? Parking lot. Outside the offices. Go back inside. Go to a public space. Don't go to your car alone. Raymond is 12 minutes away. Emma felt the cold settle into her. Not panic, she had learned that panic was useless, that it consumed resources you needed. Just cold clarity. He's not going to do anything in a building full of people in the middle of a Friday. No, but I need you inside until Raymond. Damian. She kept her voice level. Tell me what the resolved situation was. Emma. Tell me now or I walk to my car and drive home, and you can explain it to me there. The pause this time was different. She heard him making a decision. Marsh had a partnership with a man I removed from the city's financial infrastructure 14 months ago, he said. When that man left, Marsh lost a significant revenue stream. He spent 14 months rebuilding and redirecting. We assessed him as a secondary figure, not a principal. A breath. If he's now in a position with direct authority over something that affects you, he was either placed there or maneuvered there. To get to you, Emma said. To get to me through you. A pause. I underestimated him. Yes, I underestimated him. Emma stood in the parking lot and thought about her grant, the community theater, the kids in the program who needed the funding, the director who had been running the program on nothing for 2 years, the 83-year-old woman who came to every Friday class because it was the only place she felt like herself. She thought about all of that and felt a very specific, very focused anger begin to build. He's going to kill the grant, she said. Probably. To send you a message. Yes. Through my work. Her voice was quiet and even. Through kids in a theater program. Emma, I need you to hear what I'm saying, she said. He went after my aunt to reach me. Now he's going after children in an arts program to reach you. Through me. She paused. This is what you meant when you said I was a vulnerability. Yes, Damian said. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Fix it. She paused. And Damian, remember what I asked about the other one. Same applies here. A silence. The grant will be funded, he said. I give you my word. How not through Marsh, through a separate channel, a legitimate foundation that has been looking for exactly this kind of community program. The money will be cleaner than anything the committee would have provided. Emma took a breath. The anger was still there, but underneath it, something else had shifted, a recognition, uncomfortable and important, that her world and his were not going to stay in separate lanes no matter how carefully she maintained them. They were the same road now. They had been the same road since the night she stayed through dessert she didn't order. I need to know something, she said. Tell me. Is this always going to be how it is? Someone finding the thing I care about and using it. Her voice didn't waver, but she felt the question in her chest where the real weight of it lived. Because if it is, if that's just the permanent condition of being near you, I need to know that, clearly. So I can decide whether. Not always, Damian said. The first year is the most exposed. After that, the landscape changes. People understand the configuration. They understand what touching what's mine costs them. He paused. But I won't tell you it goes to zero. There's no version of my life where the risk goes to zero. I know, Emma said. I'm not asking for zero. I'm asking if it becomes livable. The pause before he answered was the kind that meant the answer cost him something. Yes, he said. Becomes livable. I've seen it. Another pause. I've never wanted it enough to try before, but yes. Raymond pulled up. Emma looked at the car, at Raymond's steady presence behind the wheel at the ordinary Friday afternoon street around her. She thought about Patricia's words, you keep the doors, all of them, and you remember which ones open from the inside. She thought about Dana's question, who are you when you're with him? She thought about Garrett's assessment, you won't leave scared. She thought about an 83-year-old woman who went to Friday theater class because it was the only place she felt like herself. Raymond's here, she said. I know, go with him. Damian. She opened the car door. The foundation, the one that's going to fund the grant. Yes. I want to meet them properly. I want to present the program the same way I would to any funder. I don't want a check that arrives without a relationship. She got in the car. That's my work. It stays mine. Arranged, when he said immediately. Thank you. She hung up and sat in the back seat and closed her eyes for exactly 30 seconds and then opened them because 30 seconds was enough. The meeting with the foundation happened 10 days later. Emma presented the community theater program with every document in order, every outcome measured, every cost justified. The foundation director, a woman in her 60s named Sylvia Park, who had the warm, direct energy of someone who had spent 40 years making things happen, leaned forward at the end and said, "This is exactly the kind of work we exist to support." The grant was approved for 3 years, more than Emma had asked for, more than the committee would ever have given. She sat in her car afterward and felt something she couldn't immediately name, a fullness, a completion, the particular satisfaction of a thing done right. She had done this. The program was funded because she had built a case that was undeniable. The source of the introduction was complicated. The work itself was not. She was learning to hold both. The complicated source and the real work. The dangerous world and the ordinary one she kept inside it. She was not always graceful about the holding. There were nights she lay awake with the accounting of it running through her head, weighing what she'd gained against what she'd altered, calculating whether she was still recognizably herself, or whether she'd been rearranged into something that used her face and her voice, but moved according to different instructions. And then she'd sit up and think about the theater kids, about Dana, who had been to dinner with both of them twice now, and had privately told Emma that Damian was the most unsettling person she'd ever met, and also possibly the most honest, which she found deeply inconvenient. About Patricia, who called on Sundays and never asked the question directly, but listened to the shape of Emma's voice for the answer anyway, and for the last several weeks had seemed to find it acceptable. About the ground rules, still standing, all of them. She'd lie back down and she'd sleep. The night it became fully real, not just real in the way she'd been intellectually accepting it, but real in the permanent bone-deep way, was a Thursday 3 months after the theater grant, 5 months after the restaurant, 5 months after 31 minutes of waiting and a man sitting down across from her like he'd always intended to. She was at the penthouse, late. They had eaten dinner and it had been ordinary, genuinely ordinary, the kind of ordinary you had to earn by surviving enough of the extraordinary. And afterwards, she had been curled in the corner of the large dark couch, reading, and he had been at the desk working, and the city had been doing its glittering thing beyond the windows, and at some point, she had looked up from her book and looked at him and felt something so quiet and so complete that she had no word for it at first. She sat with it for a moment. The word that arrived eventually was home. Not the penthouse. The penthouse was still a place she found slightly overwhelming. Not his world, which she navigated with her doors always memorized, but this specific arrangement, this particular person at that desk in that silence. The fact that he had not once in 5 months made her feel small. The fact that when she pushed back, he listened. The fact that when he had failed her, he said so plainly without building a case for his own defense. The fact that she was still entirely herself. He looked up from the desk. He caught her looking. Something moved through his expression. The thing she had first seen at the elevator door 5 months ago. The thing she still didn't have a perfect word for, but had come to recognize as his version of what other people wore openly on their faces all the time. "What?" he said. "Nothing." She looked back at her book. Work. She heard him push back from the desk. She heard him cross the room. He sat down at the other end of the couch, not close, not crowding the same correct geometry he'd maintained from the beginning, the deliberate distance of a man who measured everything. "Emma." She looked up. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear it as information. Not a pressure, not a demand. Information." She set her book down. "Tell me." "Garrett told me last week that he's never seen me." He stopped. Started again. "In 11 years of working with me, Garrett has never once seen me make a decision based on something other than calculation. He told me that now he has." Emma held very still. "I made the decision to sit down at your table 5 months ago," Damian said, "because I wanted to, not because it was strategic, not because it served anything I was building, because I looked across a room at a woman who was waiting with her back straight and her chin up, and I thought, I am not going to let her spend this night alone." He paused. "That was not a calculated decision. I want you to know that." "I know," Emma said quietly. And every decision after that, he stopped again. She watched him navigate the profound unfamiliarity of saying something that couldn't be walked back, something without an exit clause built in. Has been the same kind of decision, not strategy, not acquisition, the other kind. The kind that scares you, Emma said. He looked at her. Yes. Good, she said, it should. It scares me too. She paused. That's how you know it's real. He was quiet, then, yes, I think that's right. She picked her book back up. He stayed where he was at the other end of the couch and went back to whatever he was turning over in his mind, and the city continued its ordinary, extraordinary business beyond the glass. And Emma Richards read 3 more pages before she acknowledged to herself fully and without qualification that she was in love with a man whose world had no clean edges and no guaranteed exits and no version of itself that was simple. She was in love with him. That was the fact. The rest was the work. She was prepared to do the work. 6 months after a blind date that didn't show up, Emma sat across from Damian Vulkoff in a restaurant, a different one this time, smaller a place they had found together, a place where nobody looked at her twice when she walked in, and he slid an envelope across the table. She looked at it. What is this? Open it. She opened it. It was a document, legal official with a foundation's letterhead at the top. She read the first paragraph and looked up. This is a board seat. A voting board seat, he said. The foundation that funds your theater program and 4 others like it across the city. You would have direct governance authority over the grant process. He paused. It's legitimate, fully. No connection to anything else. I had Sylvia Park structure it specifically so that no one can ever trace it to me. Why, she said. Because you told me your work stays yours. He looked at her steadily. I'm not giving you a position in my world. I'm making sure you have a position in your own. One with teeth, one where you're not dependent on a committee chair someone can plant. Emma looked at the document. She thought about Gerald Marsh and the goalposts and the deliberate obstruction. She thought about the theater kids and the 83-year-old woman who went because it was the only place she felt like herself. She thought about ground rules and what it meant that he was still honoring them 5 months later in ways that mattered, in ways that cost him something. I'll have a lawyer look at it, she said. I'd expect nothing less. She looked up at him. You know what this means? If I take this, if I have actual governance authority over something, I become harder to get to. Anyone who wants to use me to reach you runs into an institution instead of a person. Yes, he said, that's protective. Yes. You're protecting me from the vulnerability of being close to you, she said, by giving me something that makes me structurally independent. He held her gaze. Yes. Emma felt the full weight of that settle into her. She thought about the man who had sat down uninvited across from a woman waiting alone and had from that first moment been moving toward this, not toward possessing her, not toward installing her in a cage, however gilded, but toward a configuration in which she couldn't be used against him because she was too strong to use. He had been building her a position the whole time, not inside his world, alongside it. That's the most honest thing you've ever done, she said. I told you I'd try, he said. She took the envelope. She put it in her bag. She picked up her menu and looked at it and said without looking up, the salmon is good here too, by the way. I looked. She heard something shift in his voice, the ghost of the thing that might become a smile. I know, he said. I looked too. They ordered. They ate. The restaurant did its ordinary work around them, glasses in conversation and the small, real sounds of a city feeding itself on a weeknight. Emma Richards sat across from Damian Vulkoff and was in the most fundamental and hard-won sense of the word exactly where she had chosen to be. Not claimed, not caged, not managed or arranged, or maneuvered into a position she hadn't examined from every angle. She had negotiated ground rules and enforced them. She had read the footnotes. She had sent Raymond away twice and called him back on her own terms. She had stood in a parking lot and said, fix it to a man who controlled the underneath of the city, and he had fixed it the way she asked him to. She had kept her job. She had kept Dana. She had kept Patricia and her Sunday calls and the careful listening for the shape of Emma's voice. She had kept herself. That was the thing nobody told you about walking into a dangerous world with your eyes open. It didn't change you the way you feared it would. It didn't sand you down or soften your edges or replace your values with someone else's. Not if you kept your doors, not if you remembered which ones opened from the inside. Emma had walked into that restaurant 5 months ago, expecting a bad date and a story to tell Dana in the morning. She had walked out with something she hadn't known to ask for a life that was fully irreversibly hers, complicated and real and chosen and hers. One mistake on a blind date, that was what everyone would call it later. Her Aunt Dana, the people who would hear the story in pieces and assemble their own version. One mistake, wrong restaurant, wrong table, wrong man. Emma Richards picked up her wine glass and thought about the word mistake, about how it required in its definition a wrong turn, a deviation from the correct path. And she looked across the table at the man who had sat down uninvited and told her the truth and conceded 2 of 3 ground rules and said thank you at an elevator door and called himself her vulnerability and meant it as a gift, and she thought about whether wrong was really the right word for any of it. She decided it wasn't. It hadn't been a mistake. It had been the first true thing. And Emma Richards, 31 years old, board seat in her bag, back straight, chin up, had not the slightest intention of letting it go.